I bought my place on the lake because I wanted peace. After 30 years in engineering, long days of running projects, and an endless parade of deadlines, I had dreamed of retiring somewhere quiet, somewhere the water still moved with the rhythm of seasons instead of traffic. The little house I chose sat just off a gravel road, tucked among pines, with a dock that reached into the glassy surface of Lake Carrington. It wasn't grand, it wasn't modern, but it was mine, and from the first morning I stood on that dock. With a cup of coffee, watching mist curl above the water, I knew I'd made the right decision. The boat was nothing flashy either. A modest, weather-worn fishing boat with a motor that purred only after a little coaxing, but it had history. I'd bought it used from an old friend of mine who served with me back in the Air Force. To me, it wasn't just a boat, it was continuity, a way to carry forward the moments of friendship and the simplicity of days spent on water far from the noise of the world. I kept it moored at my dock, the same dock that had stood on this shoreline since the 1950s, built back when the lake community was a scattering of cabins rather than the tangle of subdivisions it had become. For nearly 2 years after moving, life was everything I wanted it to be. Mornings on the dock, afternoons tinkering with small projects, evenings with friends and neighbors who shared the same appreciation for quiet waterside living. We swapped stories, traded vegetables from gardens, and talked about the fish we'd caught. But as more houses crept up around the lake, a different kind of neighbor moved in, one that didn't care much for the history of the place or the balance that had existed for decades. That's when the Homeowners Association started making itself known. At first, it was subtle. Letters about lawn height, notes about exterior paint colors, an occasional reminder about community standards. I paid them no mind because my property, as far as I understood it, wasn't actually under their jurisdiction. My lot had been carved out long before the HOA was incorporated, and I held the deed in my hands the day I signed the closing papers. Still, I didn't want conflict. I figured if they needed to vent their sense of control, better at someone else's expense than mine. But one morning, a letter arrived that made it clear I wasn't going to be left alone. It was printed on the HOA's letterhead, folded with a sense of self-importance, and taped right to the post by my dock as if to make a point. It read, "Notice of violation. Your vessel must be removed from the dock immediately. This dock is part of common lake access and cannot be privately used for boat mooring. Failure to comply within 14 days will result in escalating fines and enforcement actions." I read the letter twice, then 3 times. The first chapter of the fight had been quiet. I had kept my head down, documented everything, and let the HOA dig its own hole. But if Chapter 1 was the calm before the storm, then Chapter 2 was when the thunderheads rolled in and the air got heavy with the promise of something inevitable. The fines started arriving like clockwork. Every Friday, a white envelope sat in my mailbox stamped with the HOA's logo. Inside was another notice of accrued violation, tallying up how many days my boat had been illegally moored and multiplying that number by $200. Within a month, they claimed I owed nearly $6,000. By 2 months, the amount had ballooned past $10,000. Each letter threatened liens, property seizure, and legal remedies. I didn't pay a dime. Instead, I opened a new binder and carefully slid each letter into a sheet protector. I had already contacted the county office, who confirmed in no uncertain terms that my dock sat entirely within my private parcel. The HOA had no jurisdiction, but I didn't show my hand, not yet. Meanwhile, the board doubled down. They started sending out community-wide newsletters that painted me as the villain. Words like non-compliant homeowner and violator of community trust appeared in print for every neighbor to read. I'd walk into the local store for groceries and feel eyes on me, whispers circling like mosquitoes. Then came the incident with the inspection team. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sanding down a section of the dock when 3 men in matching polo shirts strode down the gravel road and straight onto my property. No knock, no call ahead. Just walked right in with clipboards and cameras. "This area is under inspection," one of them announced as he began snapping photos of my boat from every angle. "Inspection?" I asked, standing up and brushing sawdust off my hands. "On whose authority?" "The HOA board," another replied sharply. "You've been repeatedly warned. This dock will have to come out and the boat with it. We're here to document before enforcement." I felt the old military steel in my spine then, the calm firmness that comes when someone crosses a line they shouldn't. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, "you're trespassing. You have 30 seconds to step off my property before I call." "The sheriff?" They laughed. One even muttered, "He thinks he's above the rules." But when I pulled out my phone and started dialing, their smirks faltered. They shuffled back, muttering under their breath as they retreated up the road. That night, a fresh letter arrived. This one wasn't the usual printed notice. It was hand-delivered, slipped under my door. "Final warning. Remove the vessel within 7 days, or the HOA will authorize removal at your expense. Further refusal will result in court action and potential lien against your property." It was signed by the HOA president himself. That was the moment the fight stopped being theoretical. They were making a direct move now, threatening to come onto my land. By the time the HOA slapped that orange removal notice on my boat, the fight had gone past irritation and into open hostility. They weren't just flexing their rules anymore. They were threatening to lay hands on my property. And in my world, that was a line you didn't cross unless you were prepared for consequences. The funny part was, every move they made only tightened the case against them. I had a binder now, thick with letters, notices, photos of trespassing inspectors, and even the orange sticker that had been pasted on my boat. To anyone else, it looked like harassment. To me, it looked like ammunition. Still, I knew what I had wasn't enough on its own. This wasn't just about proving I owned the dock. I needed to show how deep their ignorance ran, how much they had overlooked in their arrogance. So I went back to the county courthouse. The clerks knew me by then. I'd been down there nearly every week, digging through old maps and plats. But this time, I asked for records going all the way back to when the lake was first developed. After some time in the archives, I found what I'd been looking for: a series of easement agreements from the 1950s. They described, in black and white, how the original property owners granted access to the water. And there it was, plain as day. The only legal road leading into the lakefront parcels ran across the land I now owned. That meant one thing. Without my strip of gravel, the entire HOA had no lawful way to reach the lake. Every dock, every community space, every boat launch, all of it depended on crossing my property. I sat there in the courthouse, papers spread across the wooden table, and felt a calm satisfaction settle over me. The HOA thought they had leverage. In reality, I held the one card they couldn't play without. That night, I laid everything out on my dining table: the deed, the maps, the easement records, the binder full of HOA threats. I studied it like I used to study mission plans in the Air Force, methodically, patiently, looking for the angles. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to flip the board entirely. The first step was to let them keep pushing. The more aggressive they became, the more unreasonable they looked. I didn't answer their letters. I didn't show up to their hearings. I let the fines stack, the threats escalate, the board stew in their self-righteous certainty. Meanwhile, I reached out to an attorney I trusted, an old friend from my engineering days who now specialized in property law. When I handed him the folder and the easement maps, he whistled low. "Son," he said, "they've stepped on a landmine. Not only do you own your dock, but you own the only lawful access they've got. They keep pushing this, and you could shut down their entire association." I smiled. That's the plan. We drafted a simple, clear response. Nothing flashy, nothing emotional, Just a letter stating that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my parcel, that their fines and threats were null and void, and that any attempt to remove my property would constitute trespassing and theft. Attached was a copy of the easement map, highlighted to show that their own lake access hinged on my goodwill, but I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything. The HOA scheduled a final enforcement action meeting for the following month, where they planned to vote on hiring contractors to remove my dock and seize my boat. They sent me the notice, smugly listing. The night of the HOA's final enforcement meeting felt different from every other encounter so far. For weeks, I'd been the silent one, the neighbor who kept calm while they spat threats and tacked notices to my dock. But that night, as I walked into the community hall with my leather binder under my arm, I knew the entire dynamic was about to shift. The room was already crowded. Folding chairs lined the floor, and at the front sat the HOA board, 5 men and women who had decided it was their mission in life to dictate every blade of grass around the lake. The president, a tall man with a permanent scowl etched into his face, shuffled papers and cleared his throat dramatically when I entered. Neighbors turned in their seats to glance at me, some whispering, others smirking like they already knew the outcome. On a whiteboard behind the board table in bold black marker was the agenda for the evening. Item 3 read, authorization of boat removal, Lot 17. That was me. The meeting droned on with the usual HOA business, trash collection, paint colors, noise complaints, but I hardly heard it. My eyes stayed fixed on that one line on the whiteboard. When they finally called it up, the room shifted. People leaned forward. The president cleared his throat again and spoke with the authority of a man who believed he was untouchable. Ladies and gentlemen, we've given Mr. Walker, he gestured toward me without even looking, every opportunity to comply with community rules. He has refused. His vessel continues to occupy common property in direct violation of our bylaws. The board proposes to authorize removal within 7 days. Costs will be billed to Mr. Walker's account, along with daily fines until compliance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. One neighbor even clapped once, sharply before, catching themselves. The president leaned back, smug. All those in favor? Hands shot up around the board table, and that was the moment I stood. My chair scraped against the tile, loud enough to cut the room into silence. I didn't shout. I didn't wave my arms. I simply walked to the front, placed my binder on the table, and opened it with deliberate calm. Before you vote, I said evenly, I think you should see something. The president frowned. Mr. Walker, this isn't the time. It is, I interrupted, locking eyes with him. My voice was steady, the way it had been in briefing rooms before missions. Because what you're about to authorize isn't just a violation of my rights. It's an act that will shut down your entire association. I pulled out the first document, the plat map of my property, stamped and signed by the county. I held it up for the room. This is my deed. This dock is not common property. It sits entirely within my parcel, purchased and recorded long before this HOA ever existed. I laid it on the table and flipped to the next, an aerial map of the lake from the 1950s. And this, I continued, is the easement record from when the lake was first developed. See